we need to have a talk about Stormblood and this post from The Verge. The worst Final Fantasy XIV expansion is now free for a limited time. It got minor attention in terms of engagement, and I'm mostly here to talk about the sentiment, not the tweet. Is Stormblood Final Fantasy XIV's worst expansion? Some people might say yes, but in my humblest of opinions, they're incredibly wrong, and here's why I say that. We can find common ground on a few things. I think all of us agree that the launch of Stormblood was quite bad, and we can't mention Stormblood without talking about the mythical Rabonic stream and the lines that formed. It was actually quite endearing to see the community combine like that. And yes, in terms of story, Stormblood's launch story was among the weakest the game has to offer. Personally, I would say the second weakest behind A Realm Reborn, but we can give that one some slack because it had the unfavorable task of being the relaunch portion of the game. And what after that? What then? What's the worst part about it then? Rogger's Reach wasn't the fantastic hub town, sure, not like Idleshire where people lined up on the line, but most people went to their FC house constantly anyway or went to Kagane to hang around. But what after that? I've been vocal about my dislike for Xenos, but I consider that to be part of the story complaints. No, that's where Stormblood's complaints usually end for me personally. The one complaint people probably are going to bring up is Eureka. And sorta, like, I get where they're coming from, but we need to have a talk about Eureka. Eureka as a form of content was heavily influenced by Japanese grindy MMOs and appealed a lot more to the Final Fantasy XI players, the other Final Fantasy MMO. The place I'd failed to capture people's hearts in was in the West, like Europe and North America. But during that time, I don't feel like we were the target demographic for the game yet anyway. Stormblood did not have as big of a player base as the game does now, and I believe most of the players' population is actually over in the Japanese servers anyway. And also, here's something that people don't realize. You got spoiled with Eureka as content, and let me explain why. It was an entirely new form of combat and content with new elements, actions, and you had to work together, or at least at first. We eventually outsmarted the system and created the fabled Fate Train, but that's still working together, and still with that, Eureka was a massive undertaking. It was the second map that was, it was after the second map release that I believe that the team kind of heard the complaints and was like, okay, cool, we understand the assignment, we're gonna finish what we're doing anyway, but we can't just drop something mid-production. So they finished their planned out task, and it ended on an absolute banger of piece of content. I'm just going to mention that right now. Like Baldessian Arsenal, this especially was a big piece of content because it wasn't just a 24-man raid that you could enter like normal duty stuff. No. This was a uniquely designed piece of content. It was a 56-player raid that can only be accessed through this final stage of Eureka and Hydatos. And the amount of prep work that this content would take was pretty damn nuts, to the point where people would create entire Discord servers just so randoms can join and listen to explanations so they wouldn't fail. You couldn't be raised by normal means, there were 4 boss encounters and you didn't have a huge amount of time anyway. BA was a big and welcome challenge, and it was a big undertaking even for players to just engage with it. But people still said that Eureka sucked and that the relic weapon grind shouldn't be stuck behind that, because aside from the weapon it felt meaningless. Okay. So then the next expansion, Shadowbringers, they tried again. Baja was another large undertaking that led into another fan-favorite game, or at least fan-favorite after the PC re-release. It borrowed quite a chunk from the Evilise stuff is what I mean. Baja was another Eureka type of content, but this time it had meaning. Like in the previous expansions, it had Heaven on High or Palace of the Dead that was sort of the quicker way to level, and that was worked into Baja. And you could combine it with your relic weapon grind. And there was some really nice glamours in there that is actually meaningful gear that you could wear outside of it, and it would actually have good stats so you could actually go raid with it as well. It wasn't just fate to fate grinding when you were leveling either. The overworld mobs, or at least like overworld in terms of going into Baja, were just as useful to kill. Once you hit the last map, yeah, fate grinding was probably the best way to go forward if you want to be optimal with your time, because currencies and Baja XP was what you needed. Baja had its own XP system called Metal. You could first accrue to progress in Baja itself to go to new maps and new areas, and that can later be spent to increase your healing, defense, or damage potency, so everything went faster. In short summary, everything was addressed. It had meaning. Your grind wasn't meaningless for just the weapon. You could go in to grind to become more powerful in Baja, you could make it faster for everyone, and you got your relic weapon grind going, and you could level up your classes along the way. You were doing so many things at once. We even got an instance within Baja that worked like Baldessian Arsenal in some aspects, where people split into groups and would need to work on a similar pace to get things done. Not quite a similar size, but still. Plus, small instance content for unique and challenging fights. Dear God, the Red Chocobo fights in the Red Chocobo Meteor, no one survived that stuff. Or even 1v1s against bosses. Nope, people still weren't happy. Baja content wasn't enough, still wasn't satisfying, still wasn't rewarding. Well, congratulations, Final Fantasy XIV community. You've earned the grind you have now. You grab Poetics, you hand the minion, you get your weapon. That's the stuff you asked for. There's your relic grind, just like it was in Heaven's Ward, minus the tedious running of dungeons, but there's still time to work that in with light farming. This is the content that you asked for, because apparently undertakings like Eureka and Baja weren't engaging enough for you, so they made zero engagement relic grinds. Applaud yourself, this is what you asked for. Anyway, Stormblood, right. So, Eureka was unique and in retrospect quite amazing. Heaven on High was a bit short but still fun. Underwater diving was a nice feature, especially for treasure maps. If you know, you know. You had to dive, you were gonna thrive, baby. All the treasure maps for that expansion were the best in my opinion. I wish we could go back to the sluice system, but the way it is now is okay. The crafting system was made more fluent, although at personally points at this change to mark where crafting kinda got boring for me personally, and we got the Red Mage and Samurai who continue to be strong staples in content today. Highest DPS competitor Samurai and Raid Prog God Red Mage. Need a revive? You've got them. They got you in all content. Red Mages are always welcome. Also, Bards and Machinist finally stopped being casters, and we got the amazing Machinist rework. Well, at least in terms of its design and the way that it looked. In terms of the rework, some people say it was hit or miss with the overheat system. I thought it was okay. All of the tanks were balanced and combined well. Astrologian was having another identity crisis, but was among the stronger, if I remember correctly. And since we're talking about DPS, I think this is where the golden age of FF logs was reaching its conclusion, because killing was all about being the fastest, where, you know, it was important how much the damage was being done by the team and not you specifically. It didn't matter. Like, this is the one thing I hate about FF logs today. Big number equal good player is really not it. You kind of just want to have a good team. But anyway. Trick Attack, you will be missed. Trick Attack isn't dead or anything, it's just castrated. Like, holy crap, it's bad now compared to what it used to be. Musically, Stormblood was a little repetitive with its leitmotifs, but aside from that, it had some of the best songs, Tsukiyomi's boss battle theme being an incredible standout, for example, just like Byakko. And the story past the launch of Stormblood created one of the best characters in the game. It lifted every character around her along with it. The areas were gorgeous and some of the most unique areas that we've got so far. The battlefields, the mass sprawling sea of the Ruby Sea, Yangtze's misty hillside landscapes, and Kugane's gorges, for example, right? Also creating one of the recurring themes in cities now, which is jumping puzzles. That's where it all started in Stormblood. And while I wasn't too hyped about it originally and disappointed it wasn't actually a new, like, whole-on class to raid with, Blue Mage was also one of the most unique additions to the game in terms of introducing something new. It introduced a new type of combat, where you could also be a healer, you could also be a tank, with more actions that we know what to do with, and even challenges to go with it. And let's not forget that while I personally dislike the raiding community in Final Fantasy, they got ultimates. And some of the best savages in the game so far, all in Stormblood. All of this to say, sure, Stormblood may have been disliked, but was it the worst expansion in Final Fantasy XIV's history? Absolutely not. Stormblood was the blueprint that Creative Business Unit 3 needed to create the masterpiece of Shadowbringers. No, for my money, we're currently experiencing the worst expansion. Endwalker started with a bang, and it will end with an extremely dull dud. But I don't think you guys are ready to have that conversation just yet. Stormblood was amazing. Worst? No, that's Endwalker for my money. Worst story? No, A Realm Reborn for my money. Start putting some respect on Stormblood's name. And if for nothing else, having an intro that I cannot stop associating with one particular thing.